So, hello and welcome back to Political Agenda and welcome back to our show, Jolovan Wham.
Yes, hello. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back, Jolovan. And so you're just fresh out of prison.
That's right. I was released last week.
Wow, and you were in there for what? 10 days?
10 days.
Good golly. And tell us, how did you end up in prison?
Okay. I was convicted of an offense under the Public Order Act. What I had done was to organize a public talk, which featured the democracy activist from Hong Kong, Joshua Wong. So because I didn't apply for a permit, so I was convicted of an offense.
This was when?
This was in 2016.
Right.
Yeah, so it took 4 years for the entire case to conclude. Yeah, because upon conviction at the state courts, I also appealed to the High Court and to the final Court of Appeal. Yeah, so after all that, the verdict was still that I was guilty.
Well, I think, we understand that based on the letter of the law, of course, as I've discussed on the show PJ Thumb, that these laws are extremely broad so that any political behavior by Singaporeans can technically fall under the Public Order Act, right? And we've seen that with Silan and, just walking down the street and he got arrested and jailed for an illegal public procession. And of course yourself, you're wearing a shirt. Can everyone see the shirt? Where all you did was hold up a sign of a smiley face, and somehow that is also breaking the Public Order Act. So I don't think we need to get into a lot of detail with that. But what really startles me is that living in this day and age of COVID-19, where everyone is having a foreigner come in and having webinars with foreigners, and people in Singapore routinely attending webinars with foreigners speaking on very sensitive subjects like our economy, labor, and how you run your businesses, your mental health, all a huge wide range of subjects. Somehow all of that is okay, but what you did is still illegal. You don't think that did your lawyer in court, like in the final appeal, make this point at all?
No, because he stuck to pretty legal and technical arguments. Yeah, but I mean, the reason I'm targeted is because I'm an activist and because I'm very vocal and because I'm involved in, organizing people and events, encouraging people to question the status quo and to be critical. So I think when you're involved in these kinds of activities, you are on the government's blacklist. So, and I believe the government persecuted me as a warning to everyone else not to engage in this kind of activity. But what I'll say is that, despite the persecution, I generally don't think the cost is that high. Yeah, because these convictions often just result in a fine. Yeah, so when I went to prison, it was more as a protest against the injustice of the law. Yeah, so I could have easily paid up the fine. And I've done research on people who've been convicted of Public Order Act offences, and nobody has actually been sentenced to jail. Yeah, no matter how many times they have been convicted of the Public Order Act.
Oh, really?
Yes, that's right. So, like, if you talk about like Chee Soon Juan, for instance, right? So people have this idea that he goes to jail a lot and he's been sentenced to jail, but actually that's not true. Yeah, all his convictions have been fines, but he chose to go into jail as a protest. The same with Seelan Palay as well. He was actually convicted. I think the fine was $2,500. Yeah, and he chose to go to jail. Yeah, so that was part of his activism. So I'm just following the footsteps of people who have come before me. Yeah.
Okay. Time out. We're going to adjust the volume because it's a bit too... loud. Okay. Okay. How does that sound now? Yeah, I think that's a bit...
Is it better?
Bit better.
Okay.
A bit better. Maybe a bit... Okay. Okay. So where were we? Right. Okay, so that's really interesting to note, actually, that there seem to be limits. Obviously, these are not limits in the law, in the statutes. But what the courts will do is only impose a fine, and these fines tend to be in the order of a couple of thousand.
That's right. Yeah.
That's very
So I think
interesting.
the Singapore government's thinking on this is that they want to do just enough to scare everyone, but not too much to make you a martyr, so to speak. So then you don't become like a prisoner of conscience. Yeah. So if there's any decision that an activist makes, whether to go to jail or not, will be a very personal one, about whether you want to make a political point out of it.
Right. And then I suppose if it becomes an international issue, the government can say, hey, we didn't send him to jail. He's going to jail, he or she, they are going to jail because they're refusing to pay a fine, not because of the Public Order Act.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Very interesting. So I suppose then what people don't actually need to be that afraid of the Public Order Act, given that it is usually, or as you pointed out, it always has only been a fine on the order of a couple of thousand, which in theory could be crowdfunded or something. But then there's other costs, right? What about your legal fees or your time? You said it's taken 4 years of your time plus your lawyers. You fought it at multiple levels.
Yeah, so it depends on how far you want to go with it. So it took 4 years because I wanted to claim trial at every stage of the process. But if you choose to plead guilty when they charge you, it can be over in a matter of days even. Yeah. So it's really what you want to do with the case. Yeah.
And was there significant court costs? Because I assume there's two different costs, right? There's the court costs and there's the lawyers' fees.
Right. Yeah. So lawyers' fees would be the one that might be a bit tricky, but I'm sure there are quite a number of lawyers out there who are willing to take on these kinds of cases pro bono. Yeah, because it would be in the public interest to take on these cases. So I think lawyer fees shouldn't be a hurdle. Yeah, and also there won't be any court costs because the government is the one that's charging you. Yeah, so it's not like a civil suit where you have to pay the other side if you lose. Yeah, because in this case, the government is charging you of an offense. It's like any other offense that the government charges you for, whether it's theft, cheating. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So really, apart from the final fine, the only real cost to you was just a lot of time fighting this case. 4 years, you said.
Yes, that's right. But even so, because I have a very good team of lawyers who do all the research for me. Yeah. So the only thing I need to do is basically turn up in court.
Right.
and life for me goes on. I mean, my work still continues. I still get to travel, though of course that is restricted because the government has my passport. But they have never denied me my passport whenever I asked for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So they allow me to travel. Yeah. And they don't see me as a flight risk. Yeah.
Yes.
Because I'm not interested in claiming refugee status elsewhere or fleeing the country. Yeah. I mean, I'm doing this very purposefully and very consciously, right?
Yeah. And I think based on what the government has done before, they would be happy if you fled and never returned, right? Because then you'd be, they could say, oh, this person, see, they're disloyal. They're the first chance of, the first sign of trouble, they flee, and they're not they don't stand up for their beliefs, etc., which is the kind of line they've done on a lot of other political detainees in the past who have fled. But of course, people like Wapia or Francis Yao actually faced serious consequences for what they did and in the 70s and 80s, when we would routinely torture people who are held under the ISA. But not today, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the likelihood of that happening is very, very, very low. Yeah, in this day and age. I mean, I will not discount it entirely because we are still living in an authoritarian state, so anything can happen. Yeah, but I believe the political costs would be too high for the government.
Right. And I suppose there's also like marginal things that are hard to say that meet the definition of torture, but can be like putting someone in a room with extremely cold air conditioning, right? And given that we'd probably be dressed for the tropical weather, right? Leaving someone in a really, really cold room for a couple of hours and until, you go in and ask them questions.
Right.
That technically meets the definition of torture.
Yes, it does. And I have no doubt that they still do this, actually.
Right.
But they won't do it with Singaporeans or people whom are more empowered. Yeah. I mean, about 10 years ago, I heard of a Sri Lankan who was a victim of sex trafficking. And she told the embassy that the police put her in a cold room and assaulted her to force her to give the name of the person who trafficked her. Yeah, and she said that she was in tears. Yeah, so, but these kinds of tactics are possible to do on disempowered, marginalized populations because they are so scared they will not want to speak up. And over the years, I've heard stories from other migrant workers who have alleged physical assault from police officers. Yeah, so, but many of them are just afraid to file any official complaints or to do anything for fear of retaliation.
Okay. So I guess for Singaporeans, and well, I don't know, of PRs, but for Singaporeans where we can be more assured, and especially for someone who is trying to make a political statement, right? Because in any other country, what you did wouldn't be considered a crime. And indeed, I mean, in Singapore, what you did today, if you did it today, I don't think it'd be considered a crime. But we do have to, keep in mind that there are plenty of people who don't have full citizenship rights in Singapore. I suppose that's a whole separate conversation. So before we go on, let's clarify, because I think there's a lot of confusion out there as well, based on what I've seen, that what exactly happened at this meeting. So it was a closed-door meeting with Joshua Wong Skyping in and a few other speakers, including yourself?
No, I wasn't the speaker. I was actually the facilitator of the event. So there were two other speakers. One was Kirsten Han and the other was Silan Pale.
Right.
Yeah. So the topic was on civil disobedience and activism and democracy. So this was where Joshua Wong came in to talk about his experiences being involved in civil disobedience activities in Hong Kong. So the entire conversation, the tone and tenor of the conversation was very even. Yeah, it was very moderate actually, and the discussion was actually quite a quiet discussion. Yeah, so it wasn't anything which met the objectives of why the Public Order Act needed to be used to control this event. Yeah, because if you look at the objectives of the Public Order Act, it's actually to prevent public disorder. Yeah, so I mean, emotions weren't running high at this event. Nobody was gesticulating or raising their arms and their fists. Yeah, so it was a very rational and calm discussion. Yeah, so that's why the decision to charge me was entirely misplaced. Yeah, and of course politically motivated. So so the event was attended by slightly over 50 people, I think. Yeah, so it wasn't really anything that attracted a lot of attention also. Yeah.
Right.
And it was a public event though, in that the public was invited to attend. Yeah, but they had to RSVP so that we could control the crowd size. And because the venue that we were using was the Agora, and it was it's a small venue, right? Yes. You can't really take more than 50 to 60 people in that space. So
when the government charged you specifically as facilitator or organizer,
yes,
what grounds did they give specifically for charging you?
That I didn't apply for a permit for a cause-related event that was open to the public.
So it's not that the event was in any way dangerous or wrong, or what you were discussing was dangerous or wrong, or anything to do with the content, or anything to do really with any sort of intention. the charge was purely sort of technical. You didn't apply for a permit.
Yes, for something that was cause related and public. And of course, anything can be cause related.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Collecting coins is also a cause, right? I
Yeah.
can, if I encourage people to do that, it's a cause.
Yeah.
So like you said, right, the laws are deliberately worded very broadly and vaguely so that they can pick and choose how they want to apply it.
Okay. And at no point, I mean, throughout the trial, that's what the government emphasized, that you didn't apply for a permit. Did they actually bring up anything to do with your intentions, or what would a consequence of the gathering, like did they imply that, or say outright that it would cause disorder?
No, nothing of that nature was talked about. The entire trial was run on technicalities.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
the
so
technicalities that I
Singaporean.
had breached.
Right.
Yes, and the judges also insisted that that I had a constitutional right to free speech and free assembly, but because the Constitution also constrains my right if there are public order concerns, so that's why I was guilty. Though they never explained why what I did was a public order threat, and I don't think they wanted to go there as well. Yeah, because that would mean that their arguments wouldn't make sense. Yeah.
And so your defense focused on your what did your defense focus on?
Well, we talked about the nature of the event and also that it wasn't a public order threat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was talked about in the state and the High Court. But at the Court of Appeal, a very technical question was being posed to the judges, which was that even if I had applied for a permit, nothing can stop an unreasonable government official from granting me that permit, even if I had grounds, because the law does not empower the judiciary to instruct the commissioner or a minister to give me a permit if it was found that my reasons for applying were reasonable. Yeah, so it was on a very technical question, that the Court of Appeal was addressing.
Yeah, and I think coming back to the broader pattern, this is what we've seen in a lot of different laws where things aren't outright banned, but you just need to apply for a permit. But the ability to get a permit is extremely constrained, and the people who make the decision have a huge amount of arbitrary power whether to give it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And to give an example, Rachel Tseng, who was the co-organizer of this event that I was convicted for, a couple of years ago, she applied for a one-woman procession on International Women's Day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and she was denied that permit. And this is a one person walking, for I think 500 meters or something, and it was denied. And I have also personally made applications to hold placards at different parts of Singapore at 7 a.m. for only 5 minutes. And the permits for these applications were also not granted. Yeah, so what kind of public order threat could there possibly be for me holding up a sign at 7 a.m. for 5 minutes at an ulu part of Singapore, right? So clearly it is not about whether the event will cause public disorder. Yeah, it's about whether they like you. Yeah, whether they think you are an appropriate person to be granted this permit.
Well, flip it around. Who has been granted permits? Do you know?
Yes, I had a couple of years ago, I think, when the Penguin Gate incident happened, when the National Library wanted to pulp the gay penguin storybook. Yeah. Jolene, who is an activist, she applied for a permit, and she got it.
Okay.
Yeah, and about 10 years ago, NTUC, but of course NTUC would get it.
Right.
Yeah, NTUC also applied for a procession involving, I think, hundreds of people, to commemorate World Consumer Day. They got the permit. Yeah, so they pick and choose and decide who they think is worthy of the permit. Yeah, without any objective or standard criteria. Yeah, and this is something that needs to be challenged, right?
Right. And so, can I ask about the? I know there are all sorts of laws constraining this, but you're still in court for a whole bunch of other charges at this point in time. Plus, you're under investigation for the smiley face incident.
Yes.
And the status of all of those is still up in the air.
It's still up in the air. Yes.
but we can't really talk about that because of the Protection of Justice Administration Act and other laws.
Right.
Yeah. Where yet another law making it very difficult to have, any sort of proper political discourse in Singapore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But just to point out, with this one, the smiley face one, you just went to that point in support of the climate strikers, held up a sign, and then took a photo and left.
That's right.
And then you got a letter from the police saying you were contravening, was it? You had broken the Public Order Act?
That I had possibly broken the Public Order Act. Yeah, because after I took the photo and I posted it on my socials, saying that I was doing this in support of the climate strikers who were being investigated. So I think because I said I was doing in support of them, so that's why they said I had violated the Public Order Act. Yeah, because any kind of support can be interpreted as cause-related.
Cause-related.
Yeah, so anything that's cause-related requires a permit, right? Yeah.
Oh boy. But how does it, in materially, it is no different from the millions of selfies and photographs being taken anywhere in Singapore at any point in time. But just because it's you, really, and because it's in support of an issue which I think everyone from the Prime Minister down has agreed, right? The climate crisis has agreed it's really important, and yet somehow you're getting this letter and being investigated, and you had to go to the police station,
and they took my phone. Yeah, but I knew they were going to take my phone. So then that's why that's why whenever I get involved in activism and I get involved in these kinds of activities, I will use a phone which I don't mind losing.
Yeah.
So then my actual phone and my work stuff doesn't get affected.
Right. Yeah. This is something that I think a lot of activists have become very accustomed to, getting a sort of burner phone to show up at the police station with, so that when they demand your phone, you just hand it over.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. But at this point, they haven't given Rachel back her laptop, right? This is the laptop that was used in the
Skype event, because we Skyped Joshua Wong in through that laptop, so they haven't returned it. Yeah, but she was aware of the fact that that they might take it away, so she used the laptop that she didn't really want to, that she doesn't use on a daily basis.
It's expensive being an activist, right? Got to get a backup laptop, backup phone. I don't know if Solang has gotten her stuff back from the raid in 2015 after the election, where they took her phone and her laptop.
Yeah, she did. I think she also managed to get them to pay her some amount.
Okay.
Because I think they spoiled it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Good for her. Yeah, she took a very firm stand, because I remember they just want to give it back to her broken, and she was like, "I'm not taking it back until you compensate me and admit you broke it." Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So that's great, because I think it's important not to be coward. And to be bullied. So even if they persecute you, it's important to take a stand and to assert your rights. Yeah, because
of course, I think Terry has gone through so many computers. Every time TOC is raided, he's lost another computer. But like you say, right, he's taken a stand, and he's also contested all of these charges. And
yes, that's right. And it's important to have the community also support you. Yeah. So if you need another laptop, you need another computer, somebody gives it to you. Yeah, because they believe in what you do and they believe in your work. Yeah. So while we take these kinds of risky actions, but we also have support behind us, a community who believes in what we do. And I think that's very important. Yeah, in order to for your work to be sustainable and to survive. Yeah.
This was one of the things that a point I've been making, that actually I think it's far safer to be extremely public with what you do and your activism than to do it on the down low and the quiet. Because if you get a lot of attention, right, the political cost for the PAP government is higher if they want to persecute you, if they want to oppress you, harass you, because you're more well known, and a lot of other people will then immediately say, hey, this person, is being harassed. And whereas if you do it on the down low in the hopes of not getting attention, if you do get in trouble, no one knows.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that's
right. And then
right.
the support, community support, one of the things that amazes me about Kirsten is that she shows up at the police station when people are being questioned for, all these political activism, and even if she doesn't know the person, she'll show up there to support them and to let them know they're not alone, which is amazing. I mean, well, she's an amazing person. Well, yeah, but but she can't do that if she doesn't know that you're there.
Yes.
Right. And then, of course, the community being willing to help you get equipment or, just help you learn about the ways in which we protect ourselves, such as getting this second phone or second laptop, or the kind of things to prepare, right? Contingency plans, right? All of that comes through the community and learning from each other. But again, if you don't make yourself known that you're doing this, then the community can't support you.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and I think like what Kirsten and what several other people do when they go to the police station is to say that this is not. We're doing this because human rights are inalienable, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about because you are my friend, because I know you, or you are a good person.
Yeah.
Right. So anyone, regardless of who they are, should not have to suffer this kind of injustice. They should not have to be investigated by the police for something as minor as that. Yeah. So I think when there's this show of support, this public show of support, I think it also sends a very strong signal to the police officer who is doing the investigation that, we are watching them, we are monitoring them. And even though they will still go ahead with the investigation and the persecution, I think it's still important that to do this, because those in power need to know that they are being watched by the people.
Right. Well said. Okay, so let's talk now about you actually going to prison.
Yes.
Yeah. What was that like? I think for most people we have, it's very scary and fearsome. So what was the experience? And it's your second time, right?
Yeah, it's my second time. I should preface it by saying that I didn't get a very long sentence. So that's why whatever feelings I have about it, I can't say it's representative. But because each time I went in, my sentence was always the shortest among everyone that I shared the cell with. Yeah, so for the first time it was 7 days, and this time around it was for 10 days. And yeah, prison is just basically very boring. It's just very boring. You just have so much time and nothing to do. Yeah, so but how I survive it is read a lot of books. So I've never done so much reading in my life. Yeah, so if you want to catch up on your reading, go to prison.
That actually sounds fun to me.
So I read like 3 novels, and they averaged like 500 to 600 pages.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I finished
In 10
it.
days.
Yeah, in 10 days. And it also helps to be. I mean, if you enjoy chatting and talking to people, which I do,
Right.
because I enjoy hearing stories, right?
Right.
I enjoy reading stories, I enjoy hearing stories. So I have very good conversations with my cellmates.
Okay.
Yeah, so so it helps to be curious about people's lives and to find out about the history. And I was in a cell with someone who had lived through the Cultural Revolution.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So and this is a Chinese national. So I spoke to him a lot about that.
Right.
Yeah, and I learned about his motivations. Why did he come to Singapore? What were his experiences like? And he was a migrant worker. He worked in a restaurant, and he shared a lot about his experiences of exploitation and all that. So yeah, so I enjoyed that conversation with him. And the other person that was in the cell with me was someone who had committed a sexual offense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I listened to his story. I heard a lot about his life, and yeah, so you actually kind of in some ways develop a bond, with the people that you share the cell with, and these are people whom I ordinarily wouldn't know in everyday life. Yeah, so that kind of moment, so these kinds of conversations I think are in some ways quite precious to me. Yeah, so I do cherish them. And to quell the boredom, I mean, what you do is you need to create a routine for yourself. Right. So I did a lot of stretching exercises. I chit-chatted a lot. I read a lot. Yeah. And so a lot of my routine was just focused on these 3 things. Yeah. So once, and I showered a lot also because there really isn't much to do. And the cell can also get a bit warm sometimes because you are not given a fan. So each time you feel warm, you just like strip and go to the shower area behind and just have a shower. Yeah, I think I must have showered like 10 times a day because there's nothing else to do.
Okay.
Yeah, but you just need to psych yourself up for it, right? Just keep doing stuff, no matter how little things there are to do, but just keep doing them. And before you know it, yeah, time flies and it's time for you to be released. Yeah. What's difficult though, I think, there was the first few nights because you are not given a bed or a mattress. Right? So Singapore prisons don't have beds and mattresses. You're only given a straw mat to lie down on. Yeah. So that was quite uncomfortable for me because I have a skinny ass, right? So that meant my backside was aching for like the first 3 nights. But then after that you get used to it.
Right.
Yeah. So then from the like 4th night onwards, I think I could I got used to it. I could sleep properly already. Yeah. So
okay. So help us build a mental picture, right? So what I'm seeing is like a room, poured concrete. Is there a window?
yes, there is a window, but it's covered by like a wire mesh.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can't really see outside, though a little bit of daylight comes in. Yeah, and it's a 4x2 meter size cell.
Right.
Yeah, the 4x2 meter is enough for you to move around, and then at the back is the toilet and the shower. So the toilet and the shower is together. Yeah, it's a squat toilet.
Okay.
Yeah. And oh yes, I did a lot of cleaning when I was in the cell also. Yeah, I mean we cleaned the cell so much because there's nothing else to do. So you just
But do you have cleaning products?
yes, so you have like rags that you can use, yeah, and soap. Yeah.
Okay.
So then you just do a lot of cleaning. I mean, the cell was so clean you could eat off the floor. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're expected to clean your own cell.
yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and then this toilet, bathing, wash area, is it in any way partitioned from the rest of the cell? It's just open.
It's partitioned, so there is what they call a modesty wall.
Modesty
Yeah,
wall,
yeah.
right? Okay, so that's at one corner in the back, and then the front. Is it like the old-timey sort of bars, or is it more of a door with a slit in it? Or?
Yeah. That's a very stereotypical image of prison, right?
Yeah,
you have
yeah.
the bars, and then you see people grasping at the bar.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
it's not like that. It's just a door. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a door with a window, but that window can only be opened by people outside. So which means if the prison guards decide to open it, then you get to see outside. But if not, you are literally you can't see anything beyond the 4 walls of the cell. Yeah.
And there's no ventilation then.
There is some ventilation, but it's not that great. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a little vent at the top of the door. Yeah. And you can feel a bit of wind coming in. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So most inmates just sit around the cell shirtless. Yeah. So you just sit around. So you're just staring at each other's tits, right? That's all.
Okay. So apart from that wash area, the bath area at the back, the bathroom area, there's no other furniture, just like 3 mats that you...
Yeah. So you are just given 3 straw mats and 2 blankets. So one blanket you use as a pillow. So I will use the books.
2 blankets each.
2 blankets each. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I will use the books that have been given as my pillow. And then the extra sets of clothing I will use to cushion my bum.
Oh wait, so you can bring in books, but I remember one of the things you said after your first time was that they never gave you the books that you brought in.
Yeah.
So these other books, where do they come from?
Yeah. So they're actually from the prison library. So you can request.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So at first I was given books which were very religious, and
Such as?
Like Joseph Prince's musings. Yeah, so there was a book on Joseph Prince, and then there was Tuesdays with Maury.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there was a Chinese one that said 别埋怨多实践, which is, don't complain so much, do more, Yeah, so they had a lot of these kinds of books, and then I rejected all of them. I told the prison guard, I'm returning all these to you. Can I have more books on fiction and history? And he was actually nice enough to actually search out those books for me, and he gave them for me to read.
Cool.
So they were quite nice to me. I mean, of course, that's my experience, and
Yeah.
and I suppose they're nice to me because they're aware of the kind of case, why I'm inside, and also because my offense is minor.
Yeah.
But I think those with more serious offenses, the conditions that they experience are a lot more inhumane.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And we'll get to that in a second. I just want to ask about meals and whether you mentioned exercise. Does that take place all in the cell, or do you get out to have meals and exercise?
Right. Okay. So because it is COVID-19,
Yeah.
so the prisons have stopped all yard time. Yeah. So all inmates are entitled to a 1 hour yard time. And this is time for you to get out of the cell, get some exercise, move around in other places apart from your cell. Yeah, so all that was denied because they were afraid of that there will be an outbreak in prison. Yeah, so I made a lot of noise about that actually, because it's no joke to be locked up in a cell for 2 whole weeks. Yeah, so that only happens for 2 weeks because that is the period in which the virus is said to manifest itself, right? Yeah, so any new inmate that enters prison will have to be confined in a cell for 2 weeks. So, but I never finished my 2 week term, of course, because my sentences were 7 days and 10 days respectively. So, but I made a lot of noise about that. I said, isn't it possible to stagger the yard time? Yeah, so that those who have, so that inmates who don't have the virus and inmates that might have the virus don't mix. Yeah, I mean, there are 24 hours in a day, and there's nothing for us to do.
Right, that's true.
Yeah, so why can't you stagger it? Administratively, I think it would have been more troublesome.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that they can't say because it's troublesome, so that's why we won't do it, right? Because the mental health of all inmates is important.
Yeah.
I mean, prison is a punishment, but it shouldn't be degrading and inhumane.
Yeah.
It should not lead to a deterioration of your mental health. Yeah, otherwise it goes against the principles of rehabilitation, restore, and renew, which the prisons and the Yellow Ribbon campaign likes to talk about. Yeah, so but these appeals, of course, fell on deaf ears. Yeah, I had also written a letter to the Commissioner of Prisons to ask for yard time for newly arrived inmates, but that letter also went unanswered. Yeah.
Okay, there's some really interesting things here. First of all, why do you think it sounds like they talk? There's a certain rhetoric about rehabilitative prison system, rehabilitative prison system, right? When we talk about justice, from my limited understanding, there's a sort of spectrum between retributive justice and rehabilitative justice. And studies have shown that rehabilitative justice is actually more effective at preventing again, I mean, well, I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is rehabilitative justice is more effective at preventing people from committing crimes again and keeping people out of prison. But we seem to have a justice system that, on the one hand, rhetorically talks about rehabilitation, but from everything you're describing and everything I've heard, focuses more on retribution.
Yes, that's right. So that seems to be the approach to justice. Rhetorically, like you said, right, they will say, oh, we believe in rehabilitation. But in reality, that isn't the experience of many inmates. I spoke to one inmate who was convicted of robbery and violence. And he was sentenced to 7 years and 12 strokes of the cane. And the caning aside, which is an atrocity and it's very barbaric, but that aside, throughout the 7 years, he was kept alone in a cell and had only 1 hour of yard time every day. So you can imagine being just locked up in a cell all by yourself for 7 years of your life with only 1 hour to socialize and interact with others. How is this, how does this help in rehabilitation? Yeah.
So solitary confinement, I mean, if you see any movie, I mean, I have no idea whether movies are accurate, but solitary confinement is something that is worse than normal prison that you impose on prisoners who are misbehaving or something, because it's so much more degrading. You know, I mean, as we have found out in this COVID crisis, right? Being alone in a room for and unable to go anywhere and alone is actually extremely mentally torturing. And so, but this person was just committed robbery and violence, and that was his
That's the
day-to-day
punishment.
life.
Yeah, that's his day-to-day life. I don't know how this helps in rehabilitating someone, because when you dehumanize someone in such a way, how does that actually help that person develop and grow and turn over a new leaf?
Right.
So, but that seems to be the overriding approach, which is that these kinds of conditions are supposed to deter you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if you look at prison systems in a lot of other places around the world, with very low crime rates, they don't treat their inmates in this way. Yeah. So that link between dehumanizing someone and low crime rates is actually very tenuous. Yeah, I don't think the evidence for that is strong. Yeah, just by looking at a lot of how other countries run their prison system, and this guy also that I spoke to told me that he was punished for getting involved in a fight with someone, and he was put in a punishment cell. And the punishment cell is what you mentioned. It's like a solitary confinement. I mean, he was already in solitary confinement, in his normal cell. Yeah, but for this one, it was even worse because he didn't even have that 1 hour of yard time. Yeah, and he said that throughout his time in that punishment cell, the lights were on.
Oh.
Yeah, so he never got to experience darkness.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and the only way he could sleep was to put a t-shirt or piece of cloth over his eyes. Yeah. So for 3 months in that cell.
3 months?
Yes, he was in the punishment cell all by himself for 3 months.
Wow. Okay. Oh golly. 3 months with no darkness. I can't imagine that. I mean, that's just scary. Wow. Okay. So are there other, what you described in prison, there's no opportunities to say, like what you might see in other places of the world, take classes, learn a skill, learn something different, prepare yourself for a different life when you come out. It sounds like, based on what you
there are.
Oh, there are?
There are. So you can take classes. And I think, and the people that I talk to tell me that they take classes not because they're really interested in them, but it's just, they would just want an opportunity to get out of the cell.
Right.
Yeah. So some people pretend to be religious, right? So that they can go for the religious classes. And there are also opportunities to work. Yeah. But the wait list is very long. So someone I spoke to said he had to wait a couple of years before he was allowed to work.
Are they paid for this work?
Yes, they're paid for this work. And what I understand is that you get $1 a day.
$1 a day?
Yes. Yeah. These are all accounts from inmates. Yeah. So
okay.
I'm not able to corroborate all this. Yeah. So you don't get POF mud.
yeah. But the problem again with Singapore, right, in general, is that there are all sorts of things going on and we just don't have the information.
That's right. So the lack of transparency and accountability. I was trying to find out more about prisoners' rights. There's a Prisons Act. Yeah, but everything is so minimal and vaguely worded that it doesn't really give you much insight into the kinds of rights that prisoners have. Yeah.
And I guess, this is always, around the world, advocating for the human rights of prisoners is always tricky because there's people are going to feel like, well, these people committed crimes and, they deserve to be in there and they deserve to suffer.
Yeah.
Right?
The common Singaporean response is, what you expect? It's prison, what? You think what holiday chalet, is it? Right? So that's a very common kind of response. It's like, you deserve it. Yeah. So I think one of the big challenges and obstacles to prison reform is also changing people's mindsets about what prisons should be like. Yeah. And I think the best way if we want to advocate for prison reform, or even abolition of prisons for that matter, I think we have to make that connection between rehabilitation and prison conditions itself. Yeah. So people have to see that there is a benefit to society for prisons to be reformed. Yeah.
And I think also people need to understand not everyone in who goes to prison is some sort of hardcore, unrepentant criminal, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You know, starting with yourself, right? But there's plenty other people. Like, there's a lot of correlation between, running afoul of the law and social class. You know, and there's a lot of issues that exist within our broader society about a lack of opportunities for people of certain classes, certain races, and the kind of challenges that they face, right? And I think there are some statistics which are very clear. For example, correct me if I'm wrong, but the majority of people in for drug offenses are Malay, right? The question then is, well, which way is the causation, right? We see a correlation, but which way is the causation, and how do we address that systematically and in terms of our society, rather than simply sending a lot more Malay people to jail for drug offenses?
Right. Yeah. And the correlation between poverty and imprisonment, it's very clear. So if we can do more to address the inequality and the poverty in our society, then we can definitely reduce the number of such convictions and the recidivism rates and all that. Yeah. So in that sense, it's a much more structural issue. Yeah.
And I think also, to touch on something else you said about deterrence, the fact that I think most people don't know what goes on in prison, does that make it more of a deterrence to people, or less, in the sense of, if you knew how incredibly dehumanizing the prison experience was, right? Now that I'm sitting here listening to you and learning about things that I didn't know happened, would I then be more afraid of prison, or would it demystify it? And I don't know if there's an answer to that, but there seems to be a complete lack of transparency and awareness about what goes on after someone gets sentenced to jail. And so that I'm very glad we're having this conversation, because at least, some people learn, and I'm learning about it now. But I have to wonder, are we working at, is the whole system working at cross purposes, in the sense of people actually don't realize how bad things are? And on the one hand, this means that people don't push for reform, and because there's no understanding. But on the other hand, it also doesn't really deter. You get what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. So I guess for me, the bigger issue, it's accountability. Yeah. So because so much of what happens in prisons is shrouded in secrecy. Yeah. And then the government says, trust us. We know
everything.
We know what to do, right? Yeah. So I've heard of stories of like inmates being assaulted, for example, by prison guards. Of course, I cannot corroborate these things, but it has happened. And also the punishment system within the prisons is also very arbitrary, right? So if you commit an offense in the prison, you won't have access to any legal representation. There's no due process. So I know of someone who was caned in prison for committing an offense inside prison itself. Yeah, and the entire process does not have the same rigor that that everyone else has in the judicial system. Right? So it's as if the prison system has its own justice system and process. Yeah, which isn't rigorous at all. Yeah, because everything is decided by them. Yeah, so there's no independent body that oversees how justice is meted out within prison itself when inmates commit offenses. And I mean, in theory, there's supposed to be like the justice of the peace, all these people who are supposed to come in and check on the inmates' welfare. Yeah, but in reality, at least from what I hear from those that I've spoken to, they've never met any of these people. Yeah, and if there are any issues that they want to raise, they can only raise to the prison guards. Yeah, and of course the prison guards will protect themselves and protect their own institution. Right?
Yes. I mean, there's a lot of data about that sort of thing around the world. And so if you were a prisoner and you wanted to file a complaint, you just complain to the prison guard. That's it.
right. Yeah.
You don't get to like put anything in writing, or
I'm not too
no
sure.
process?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not too sure, but at least from my conversations with the inmates who were disciplined inside, yeah, their experience has been that everything is done through the prison guards.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And wait, just to clarify, I missed this earlier. Meal times, are they in your cell or in a common?
Oh, it's in the cell.
Okay.
So there's no common area. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So meals are all consumed in the cell, and they are given to you through this little hole.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the bottom of the door.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So you're literally like, given food like pigs in a pen. Yeah. It's just food that's just pushed at you.
And the people who've managed to work, did you speak to anyone who managed to work?
Not extensively. Yeah. I did speak to someone who did some work before. And that's how I know that, they are paid
Right.
$1 a day. Yeah, because that was what he was paid, he said.
So what I'm curious about is who is profiting here, because clearly $1 a day is not a fair wage.
That's right.
So who is he or she working for? Who are they working for? And is someone making an illegal profit, right?
Right.
Which then, if this is a point that has been raised in other systems where inmates work for a pittance, that is actually legalized slavery. And it's a huge issue, because you're being punished for a crime, but you're not. It doesn't mean that you lose the right to a fair wage.
Right.
Yeah. So do you have any?
I don't. I mean, the one that this guy I spoke to, he didn't tell me exactly what kind of work he was doing, though I suspect it was work that's commissioned by the prisons itself, like delivering meals, doing the laundry, or cooking, preparing meals. So I suspect that was the kind of work that he was doing that got him $1 a day. But I know that there are private companies out there who will contract prison inmates to do things like call center. So if you call
Really?
StarHub or Singtel or any kind of company that provides a service and has an operator, it's possible that the person who picked up the phone is an inmate. Yeah. But I'm not sure how much they're being paid. But I suspect it's going to be below market rate. Yeah, because we know from other instances and other practices that these companies often pay exploitative wages, right? Slave wages to these kinds of workers. One example I can give is, like, for example, SIA, right? SIA used to have this sheltered workshop where they would allow not inmates, like those who were intellectually disabled, they would give them the job of sealing their headphones.
Right.
Yeah, so I think there was a time when they were only paid like $100 or $200 a month, and it was termed as an allowance. Yeah,
Right.
so it's not a wage. Yeah, so the way they frame it is to say that this is vocational training. Yeah, so you should be grateful that this company has decided to give you training. Yeah.
Training to do what? To seal, to just do something a
yes.
machine could
Yeah.
do, really.
So this is one example that I can cite that I'm aware of.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure that the exploitative practice would be similar in the prisons. Yeah, I doubt they will be paid market rates for the jobs that they're doing.
And this is part of our whole broader approach, right, that our government has instituted since the 80s, where, I mean, the word is getting tired, but neoliberal approach where what you're paid is directly connected to your value as a human being. And it works both ways, right? If you feel like if you argue that, oh well, I'm going to pay someone so little because I can get away with it, right? And their value then is so much less. The other way is, you think about it as well, their value as a human being, they're being dehumanized because they're a prisoner or because they're disabled, then I can get away with paying them so much less. It's a sort of two-way street of both dehumanizing people and not paying them a fair wage that has driven us into this incredibly exploitative global economy that exists today. And it's just I think this is a topic that we've been over before, and it's widely recognized. But it's just so frustrating to hear examples of this where either you get a low wage and therefore you're dehumanized, or you're dehumanized and therefore you get a low wage.
Right.
How do we build a society that respects human dignity when we treat the least of us, right? Because we're not even talking prisoners now, we're talking disabled people.
Yeah.
And you're exploiting them as well because you can.
Right. Yes. So, and I think what's missing here is that, I mean, a lot of these conversations are happening globally.
Yeah.
But they're not really happening locally in Singapore. Right. So even if they are, it's probably among like a very educated elite group. Yeah. So how do we like mainstream these kinds of issues and conversations?
Well, part of the problem is is simply that we can't talk about these things. There's no sufficient data. There a lot of these conversations are suppressed, which brings us back to the main topic, right? The fact that just because you tried to have a conversation about peaceful ways of resisting the government, right? Civil disobedience, they send you to jail.
Yeah.
So, you have a peaceful conversation, very rational, very calm, right? Carefully controlled, and they send you to jail. How are we supposed to have honest conversations about far more controversial topics like prison reform?
Right.
How we treat the least among us. We can't. So this is what's so frustrating, and this is why it ends up being conversation. Just people like us who know how to navigate the system and have far less to fear. And this is what's so frustrating. And then of course then the conversation becomes, it's or some people say it's because people who are less educated don't have the capacity to deal with these issues, which is nonsense, right?
Yeah,
There's
it is
plenty-
nonsense.
People who experience these issues intimately on a daily basis are the best people to understand it,
Yes.
right?
And they want to talk about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they can't because they have so much more to lose in some ways.
Yes.
And, and so we end up shutting off ourselves also from people who can talk about these things, or, we just end up talking among ourselves, which becomes very frustrating.
Yeah.
Anyway, mini rant over. Okay. So you're trying to do something about this. You've started a website.
Yes, I've started a website. I started it because as someone who was going into prison, I needed information. I wanted to know what was happening inside so I wouldn't get a culture shock. Yeah. And to prepare myself mentally also. And I found that information was scarce. And I had to like dig into like Reddit and Hardware Zone and Sammy Boy threads,
Really?
in order to
Of all places?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes,
Okay.
those were the only places where, some people would share their personal experiences about being an inmate. Yeah.
Right.
So
Makes sense.
that gave me this idea to start this website. Yeah. That, because a lot of people don't know, like there was this, when I went in the first time, there was this guy who didn't know that there were no beds in prisons.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he thought that there would at the very least be a mattress. And
Yeah.
then he was aghast when he found out that it was only a thin straw mat, Yeah. So I think we need, so there is I believe a huge demand for a website like this for people to know what prison conditions are like. So I'm creating this website so that people can mentally prepare themselves when they go in. I'm also trying to get more information about caning, and I managed to speak to someone who was caned 12 strokes. So I'll be updating the website soon to talk about that, what the whole procedure and the process is like. And I'm also interested in improving prison conditions. Yeah, because I think, the denial of liberty is the purpose of prison, right? That's the punishment.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be to degrade you further and treat you in an inhumane way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that aspect needs to change. And I'm interested in looking at prison reform in that way.
Yeah, and this website is PrisonLife.sg.
Yes, it's called PrisonLife.sg. Yeah, and I'm also collecting stories of people's experiences inside. Yeah. So anyone, who's listening to this, if you have been in prison before, if you know someone who's been convicted, feel free to get in touch with me. I'd like to be able to document your experience, and it will all be anonymous. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about your identity being disclosed.
Right. And there's contact information on PrisonLife.sg.
Yes, there
you can
is.
go there and get in touch with you.
Yes. So I've actually, through that website, I've already spoken to about 7 or 8 people. Yeah.
Okay. And you also wrote a letter to the Commissioner of Prisons about the conditions, right? That was specifically what you were talking earlier about the COVID situation and staggering, right? And are you planning to do, do you have any further plans beyond documenting? Have you thought about how you want to campaign for prison reform?
I think at the moment, what's important is to get information and data.
Okay.
Yeah. So because there's so little information, there's so little transparency. So I think our calls for reform would be better if I can get as many stories and accounts from inmates as possible. Yeah, and also to look at the research out there on prisons in other places around the world. Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of anyone doing prison reform work in Singapore. So it's really a very new field. It's also very new for me. I mean, my whole life I've done mostly like work on migrant workers.
Yeah.
So but I'm interested in looking at the criminal justice system. Yeah. So prisons is also one aspect. I'm also interested in looking at police procedures.
Right.
How the police conduct themselves. I mean, there is this myth that our boys in blue are beyond reproach. Yeah, which is not true.
No,
yeah,
of course.
because
everyone's human.
That's right. So when you talk to like vulnerable populations, especially, police abuse happens there. Yeah, but all that is swept under the carpet. Yeah, so I think we need to document more of these kinds of stories and get more data on these kinds of things.
Okay. And when you were sentenced to jail, was there any information given to you at all? Were you just taken straight to jail pretty much and then put through the system? Or was there... I mean, I suppose it's too much to ask that you were handed some sort of pamphlet that says what to know now that you're going to jail.
Right. Yeah. So everything... Yeah. So I didn't know anything or what was going to happen. They did ask me if I was gay. Yeah,
what's their business?
I suppose maybe they think that if you are put in a cell, with men, and you are gay, you might sexually assault them, or they might sexually assault you. So maybe for them, they're looking at it from a security point of view. I don't know. Yeah, but they asked me that question. Yeah, whether I was gay or straight. And very funnily enough, I mean, the guy who asked me, I think I was probably the only person who came out to him, the only inmate that came out to him, because when I said that I was, he looked at me with this shocked look, and his eyes were like, it looked like they were going to pop out. Yeah, and there was silence actually for like 2 seconds, and then he gave me the tablet, because he was actually asking me a lot of questions, like what are your dietary preferences, what is your race, blah blah blah, etc. So when it came to the sexuality question, he was shocked when I said I was gay. So then all that time he was ticking the options on the tablet, but when it came to the sexuality question, he refused to tick it. So he passed me the tablet and said, why don't you just put there yourself that you are gay? So I was like, okay. So yeah.
Okay.
And then I was asked that question the second time when I was at Changi. Yeah, because the first time I was asked, I was in remand. Second time it was at Changi. But this time the question was a little bit more professional. So they didn't ask whether I was gay or straight. They just asked, have you had sex with men recently? Yeah. So I was... my answer was no. Yeah. My answer actually was yes. Yeah. But in reality, it's no, because I'm a born again virgin, right? So it's been a while. So, but I wanted to also find out what would happen if you if someone says that yes, they've had sex with men recently. What would happen? Yeah.
And then what happened?
Nothing actually. Though when I was questioned on the second, because on the second day I had a welfare interview. Yeah. So the guard said to me, so you declared yourself gay, huh? I said, yes. Is that a problem? He said, oh, no, of course not. And he just left it as that. Yeah. So I don't think my disclosure led to anything. But again, I see myself as as an extraordinary case, because The reasons I'm going in is political. So I'm not sure if the treatment would have been different for someone who was gay and was committing any like a normal offense. Yeah.
But it sounds like, based on what you said, no one bothers. No one declares themselves gay. They just
Yes, I suspect no one
rare.
does because it's very rare, and I think people are afraid of the consequences of declaration.
Yeah.
So I was probably the only person in a long time who did that. Yeah.
Huh. What? Okay. So you actually mentioned a welfare interview. So are there any other sort of what's the right word? Concessions? I don't know if that's the right word.
I'm not sure. You see, the welfare interview...
The welfare of prisoners, how is that taken care of in prison?
Right.
Yeah.
I had that welfare interview the first time I went in, and I was the only person who had it in my cell.
Really? The others? So you asked the others and they said
so
no?
The other two didn't. Yeah, the other two didn't get that interview. Yeah. So again, that's why I feel that maybe because of the nature of my case, they were treating me a little bit more differently. Yeah.
Well, you see, the fact that they can do that, right? Because if you're saying we have a professional prison, every prisoner should be treated equally and there are certain standards, then either everyone gets a welfare interview or no one gets a welfare interview. Why is it you get a welfare interview and they don't get a welfare interview?
Right. So I don't know. Maybe after I was released, they got their welfare interviews. I mean, I can't confirm it, right? Yeah. But it was quite unusual that I had that welfare interview on the second day of my sentence.
And how long had the other two been in there?
They came in the same day as me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but they didn't get this interview.
And this was your first time, or
This was my first time.
First time. So you were there 7 days, and by the end of 7 days, neither of your other two, the people sharing your cell, had gotten a welfare interview.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And what's the purpose? You were told it's a welfare interview?
Yeah, because he told me, oh, we just want to check on you, how things are. We want to check on your welfare. Like, so they asked me things like, how's the food? And I said, what do you think? Yeah.
It was also only the second day. So
yeah, that's right. Did you sleep well last night? And, so they asked me stupid questions.
Right.
Yeah. So so I said, well, I would sleep better if you gave me a bed.
Yeah.
So and then he just smiled. And, I mean, it was a routine kind of questioning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they just had to show that they ticked the box. Yeah. So I think that was the purpose of the interview. In the event that they are questioned maybe by international groups or media, I don't know. Yeah.
Right.
So I saw it as a cover backside exercise.
Yeah. Because historically, political prisoners do get questions directed from outside, directed to the government or prisons, from international NGOs.
Yes.
Amnesty raised your case as well.
Yeah.
So they and Amnesty, of course, encouraged people to write letters. So they probably were checking those boxes. Okay. Is there anything in terms of prison reform, right? Do you think, what is the most obvious thing you think needs to be done?
Right. I think we need to look at agreed international standards that have been agreed upon. So the United Nations actually has a minimum standards for the treatment of prisoners. Yeah. So I think we need to review the whole system in light of those principles that have been set out. Yeah, I think that's the first step. Yeah. And also very importantly, ask prisoners themselves and ex-inmates, right?
Yes.
What are your experiences like? Yeah, and get them to give recommendations and suggestions. I doubt the Singapore government does this.
Yeah, I don't. I would seriously doubt that too.
Yes, seriously, yes.
Yeah.
I would say they don't do this at all. I mean, yeah.
Right. You've got a bunch of more cases pending. Do you think if you get convicted and fined again for your other cases, do you plan to go back to prison?
Yes. That's the plan. Yeah.
And have you thought about how you'd prepare? Is there anything you want to do before you go in? Or I guess it's two separate things. One is if someone else was sent to prison, what would you recommend they do, apart from reading through your website, of course? And the second is, are there things you're going to try and find out the next time you end up inside? What you're most curious about, or what you could try and.
It's quite random, actually. I mean, when I went in the second time, I wasn't expecting that I would speak to someone who was convicted for 7 years and sentenced to 12 strokes of the cane. And I also spoke to someone who experienced prison life in detention barracks, which is different from Changi prison.
Well, that's the army. You mean,
that's the army
yes,
one.
Army one,
Yeah, and I hear that the conditions there are worse. So I managed to make friends with these people. So a lot of it is very, I think, I mean, I don't go in with like a set plan, so to speak. So I look at the environment, I see what's happening, and then from there I make the most of it. So the two cellmates that I was incarcerated with the last time, we are planning to meet. We're going to have a reunion.
Okay. This is the Chinese national.
And the local guy who was convicted of a sexual offense.
Right.
So we're planning to meet, have a reunion, and to talk up. And they're going to update me about what happens after 14 days. After the COVID isolation period.
So the Chinese national was 6 weeks, and the other chap
was 8 weeks.
8 weeks. Okay.
So they're aware of this website that I'm doing, and I've asked them to contribute to it. So they said they're happy to do that. So I'm hoping to find more supporters of the cause, through my stints inside.
This sounds fascinating. If you can tell their stories, and especially about their experiences with the system, I think a lot of people will be very, very interested and will really help us understand, our system and what we can change or reform or improve.
Yes, already I'm getting like questions from students and people who want to know what's happening inside, but can't get any information. So I'm actually arranging to meet up with some of them to talk about it.
Cool. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jolovan, for taking time out from your weekend to come here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And this has been a fascinating conversation. Good luck for your website, for your pending cases. And again, for all of you who want to get in touch with Jolovan, go to PrisonLife.sg. There's contact information there. Send him questions, send him stories, send him information. But I think this is a really important issue that we definitely need to know a lot more about. So I'm really glad you're doing this. So thank you.
Thank you for your support.